Ever scroll through like comments, on some hot button issue and just like feel your blood pressure rising? It's like, ugh, well, you're not alone. We're going to dive into the psychology of why people choose like insults instead of actually discussing stuff when things get heated. We're looking at this blog post by Richard over at Mynd.works. He's got some really cool insights into how our brains work, in these situations.
Yeah, it's fascinating, this tendency to like throw shade online. It's not always about just like being mean. It really often comes from this place of like deep down psychological self-defense.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. So Richard points out that hostility in conversations, especially online, it seems like it's on the rise.
It is. It is.
Like everyone's waiting to pounce on the slightest disagreement.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things here is this thing called cognitive dissonance. It's basically just like the mental discomfort we feel when we're holding two like totally contradictory beliefs. So picture this. Someone deeply invested in like a political stance or something, they stumble upon evidence that just like totally challenges that. So instead of, stopping and thinking, maybe I should reevaluate, they lash out. It's easier to attack than to face that turmoil.
So instead of reevaluating, their brain throws a grenade. I can see how that plays out online. So besides that, are there other reasons that we like result to these insults?
Well, our brains are wired to seek out information that already confirms what we believe. It's that confirmation bias. And think about it. Echo chambers, personalized feeds, all that stuff. We're constantly being bombarded with things that reinforce our views, which makes it harder to be open to anything else.
So we're basically just marinating in our own biases. No wonder it's so hard to have like real discussions these days.
And then there's that tribalism.
Yeah.
That us versus them mentality. Insults become weapons to like defend our tribe and its beliefs no matter what. Kind of like, those ancient survival instincts kicking in. Yeah. Even if the stakes are just like a Twitter debate or something.
Yeah, we've all seen those threads spiral. But, Richard also mentions emotional immaturity being a factor too.
He does.
How does that fit into all of this?
Well, think of it this way. Someone with low emotional maturity just hasn't developed those skills to handle disagreements constructively. They haven't learned to like express their frustration or differences of opinion in a healthy way. So they kind of default to these personal attacks or, just name calling. They just don't have the tools yet to articulate their thoughts effectively.
So it's like they're stuck in a communication time warp, like
Right.
back when just flinging insults was the norm. So, okay, we've kind of established why some people go straight for the jugular. But what about the people who manage to stay open even when things get heated? What's their secret?
Well, one key factor is emotional intelligence. That ability to manage our own feelings, but also to understand other people's perspectives. So people who are high in emotional intelligence, they can actually recognize their own reactions in the heat of the moment. And they can choose to respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting defensively.
So they're like emotional ninjas, dodging those knee-jerk reactions.
Pretty much. They can step back from that initial surge of, I need to be right, and engage more constructively. And that actually ties into another important quality, having a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here. Break that down for me.
Okay, so picture someone with a fixed mindset. They see their beliefs as completely set in stone, so any challenge feels like a personal attack. But growth mindset folks, they see disagreements as opportunities to learn and expand their understanding. They're open to the possibility of being wrong, which, can be tough for a lot of people to swallow.
Yeah, it's a big distinction. It's the difference between a closed door and an open window.
Exactly. And lastly, we can't forget about the power of just genuine curiosity and open-mindedness. Some people are just naturally curious about the world and different perspectives. They don't see those opposing views as threats. They see them as chances to learn and grow. So they approach conversations wanting to understand, not just to win an argument.
That's so refreshing. Okay, so we've got this cognitive dissonance driving the defensiveness. We've got tribal instincts fueling those us versus them battles, and emotional immaturity sort of limiting communication skills. But on the flip side, we've got emotional intelligence, growth mindsets, and a thirst for understanding paving the way for like open dialogue. So how do we actually put all of this into practice?
Well, Richard offers some really practical advice. It all starts with becoming aware of our own emotional triggers. So before you react to someone who disagrees with you, take a moment, pause, check in with yourself. Are you feeling defensive, angry, frustrated? Naming those feelings is the first step to managing them effectively.
So instead of firing off that snarky reply, we hit the pause button and figure out why we're feeling so reactive in the first place.
Exactly. Mindfulness practices like meditation can be incredibly helpful here. They train your mind to become more aware of your thoughts and emotions without judgment.
I can see that. Richard also talks about getting out of our echo chambers and actively seeking out different perspectives, which is easier said than done, I think.
It can be, but it's crucial for breaking free from that confirmation bias. So try to purposefully engage with content that challenges your beliefs. I know it might feel uncomfortable, but that's honestly where the magic happens. Ask yourself, why do they believe this? What evidence are they using? Is there anything I can learn from their perspective?
So instead of just reading articles that confirm what we already think, we should actively seek out the ones that present different viewpoints. It's about expanding our understanding, not shutting it down. And that ties right into cultivating a growth mindset, right?
Right. Embrace the fact that you can learn and change. Don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. And be open to the possibility that your beliefs might evolve over time.
Yeah, it's about seeing learning as like an ongoing journey, not a destination. But what about those times when we're stuck in a conversation and the person on the other side just seems determined to be right no matter what? What do we do then?
That's a fantastic question, and something we'll definitely delve into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore strategies for navigating those particularly challenging situations, where the other person seems completely closed off.
Awesome. Stay tuned for part 2. We'll equip you with the tools to handle even the most difficult conversations with grace and understanding.
Okay, so picking up where we left off. It's super important to remember that you can't force someone to be open-minded. Like, you can't control their behavior at all. But you can control your own reaction.
Yeah, totally. I've definitely had those conversations where I'm like trying so hard to be reasonable and the other person is just like throwing bombs left and right. It's so frustrating.
It is. And one thing that Richard suggests is trying to reframe the situation. So instead of seeing it as this battle that you need to win, view it as an opportunity to practice your own emotional intelligence and communication skills.
So it's like a personal challenge to stay calm and collected even when the other person is being like a total jerk.
Exactly. It's about focusing on your own growth, not trying to change the other person. And sometimes, honestly, the best thing you can do is just simply disengage.
Just walk away. But what if it's someone you can't really avoid, like a family member at Thanksgiving dinner or, a coworker on a project?
Even then, you can still set boundaries. You can just say something like, hey, I'm happy to have a respectful conversation, but I'm not going to engage if this is just going to turn into a shouting match. And, the key is to actually stick to those boundaries. If they continue to be disrespectful, you can just excuse yourself from the conversation.
Right. So it's like recognizing that you don't have to subject yourself to that kind of negativity. You have the right to protect yourself, even if it means just like walking away from a conversation that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And sometimes disengaging can actually be more impactful than like trying to argue with someone who's not ready to listen. It just sends that clear message that you're not going to tolerate disrespect.
So it's not about like giving up or admitting defeat. It's about choosing your battles.
Yeah.
And knowing when to walk away for your own sanity.
Exactly. And remember, even if you can't change the other person's mind right then and there, you might still plant a seed. They might see your calm and respectful demeanor and start to question their own approach. It can be a really powerful example.
Right. It's like be the change you want to see in the world. Even if it doesn't change the other person, at least you're staying true to yourself.
Totally. But what about those times when you do want to try to have that productive conversation? Like, are there any strategies we can use to increase those chances of success, even if the other person seems like they're resistant at first?
Yeah, I'm all ears. I mean, sometimes avoiding the conversation just isn't an option. So it would be great to have some tools to navigate those tricky situations.
For sure. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, emotional intelligence, active listening, really seeking to understand. So even if the other person is being difficult, try to approach the conversation with empathy and like a genuine willingness to listen.
Okay, I'm trying to picture this. So even if they're coming in hot with all these insults and accusations, I should still try to see things from their perspective.
Yes. People often resort to those insults and defensiveness because they're feeling threatened or insecure. So if you can try to understand where they're coming from, it might help de-escalate the situation.
Oh, that's interesting. So instead of like immediately getting defensive myself, I should try to figure out what's making them feel so threatened.
Right. Ask clarifying questions.
Right.
Really try to understand their point of view, even if you don't agree with it at all, and validate their feelings. You could say something like, I can see why you'd be upset about this, even if you don't agree with their conclusion. It's not about agreeing with them. It's about acknowledging their emotions.
So it's about separating the emotion from, like, the opinion. I can see how that could be really helpful.
It can. And when you do express your own viewpoint, try to do it in a way that's not confrontational. You use I statements instead of you statements.
Oh.
Like, for example, instead of saying, you're wrong about this, you could say, I see things differently because...
Right, it's like focusing on your perspective and not attacking theirs.
Exactly. And be willing to find common ground.
Yeah.
Even if you have some major disagreements, there might be some areas where you can agree, or at least, agree to disagree.
Right. Sometimes that's like the best you can hope for. But it's a step in the right direction. It shows that you're respecting their right to have a different opinion.
Yeah, exactly. But let's be real. This takes a lot of patience and self-control. It's not always easy to stay calm when someone's pushing your buttons.
Totally. I'm like exhausted just thinking about it. How do we keep from like burning out?
That's a great question. And this is where Richard's emphasis on mental health comes in. He really stresses that if we're struggling with our own mental health, it's going to be that much harder to handle these conversations in a healthy way.
So it's not just about learning these skills, it's about taking care of ourselves too.
Exactly. If you're feeling stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, it's going to be way more difficult to regulate your emotions and respond thoughtfully.
So it's like putting on your own oxygen mask first, before helping others. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Such a good analogy. Make time for things that help you relax and recharge. Meditation, spending time in nature, journaling, whatever works for you. And don't be afraid to seek professional help if you need it. There's no shame in that at all.
That's a good reminder. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From recognizing those like knee-jerk reactions to setting boundaries and practicing empathy. But I'm curious, what are some things we can do to actually promote more open-mindedness and understanding, like in our own lives and just in the world in general?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll dive into in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore some practical strategies for fostering more productive conversations and really cultivating a culture of open dialogue.
Awesome. I'm ready to put all this into action. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've explored the reasons behind those heated exchanges and some strategies for dealing with them. But now let's talk about solutions. How can we actually foster, more open-mindedness?
And productive dialogue, both in our own lives and in the wider world. Well, it really comes down to each of us taking responsibility for the way we communicate and interact with others. Remember those practical steps that Richard outlined? Like practicing self-awareness, seeking out diverse viewpoints, and cultivating that growth mindset. Those are the tools we can use to break free from that negativity and really create those meaningful connections we all crave.
So instead of just complaining about, how toxic things are online, we can actually do something about it by changing our own approach.
Exactly. It starts with simple things like pausing and reflecting before you hit that reply button. Ask yourself, why am I feeling triggered right now? Is there something deeper going on here?
Yeah, that self-awareness piece is so important. It's like giving ourselves a chance to choose a more thoughtful response instead of just reacting impulsively.
Right. And remember the power of stepping outside of those echo chambers we tend to build around ourselves. Make a conscious effort to engage with people and ideas that challenge your own beliefs. I know it can be uncomfortable, but that's where real growth happens.
So instead of just surrounding ourselves with people who always agree with us, we should actively seek out those who have different viewpoints. That almost feels counterintuitive.
I know. But it's not about trying to convert them to your way of thinking or winning an argument. It's about understanding where they're coming from and broadening your own worldview in the process.
It's about realizing that there's more than one way to see the world.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we actually make this happen in our daily lives?
So think back to that growth mindset we talked about. Embrace the idea that you can learn and change. It's okay to admit when you're wrong. And be open to the possibility that your beliefs might evolve over time.
It's about being open to being surprised, not getting stuck in our ways.
Right. And lastly, let's revisit that concept of emotional intelligence. It's not just a buzzword. It's a crucial skill for navigating difficult conversations and building strong relationships.
Okay, I'm all for boosting my emotional intelligence, but how do I actually do that? Where do I even begin?
We'll start by just paying attention to your own emotional reactions. Notice what triggers you and how you typically respond in those situations. It's about becoming an observer of your own inner world.
Okay, so step one is awareness. What's next?
Then get curious about those emotions. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What are the underlying beliefs or experiences that are fueling this reaction?
So it's about digging deeper. Instead of just letting those emotions control me,
Exactly. Once you start to understand your own emotions, you can begin to manage them more effectively. You can actually choose how you want to respond instead of just reacting on impulse.
so instead of lashing out with anger or getting defensive, I can take a step back and choose a better way to handle it.
Yeah. And the other essential element of emotional intelligence is empathy. That ability to really step into someone else's shoes and understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with them at all.
So even if someone's saying things that I think are totally crazy, I should still try to understand why they feel that way.
Yes. Try asking clarifying questions. Really try to see the world through their eyes. It doesn't mean you have to agree,
Hmm.
but it does mean making an effort to understand their experience.
It's about remembering that everyone has their own story. We don't have to share their beliefs, but we can still show respect and understanding.
Absolutely. And when we approach conversations with empathy and understanding, it creates space for real connection and dialogue to happen.
It's about building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. And that's what this is all about, right? Creating a world where we can engage with each other respectfully, even when we disagree.
Oh, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have so many new tools now for handling those tough conversations and for understanding why they happen in the first place.
That's great to hear. And remember, it all starts with each of us.
Yeah.
If we can all commit to being more open-minded and engaging in more respectful dialogue, we can create a ripple effect.
It's about creating a more understanding and compassionate world, one conversation at a time.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you for joining us. My pleasure. And you don't have to do this alone. If you want to learn more about this stuff, check out Richard's blog post over at Mynd.works. He has some really fantastic insights and practical advice.
And to all of you listening, as you navigate those inevitable disagreements and debates, remember what we've talked about today. Take a deep breath, check in with your emotions, and approach the conversation with curiosity and a willingness to learn. You might be surprised by what you discover. Until next time, keep diving deep.